My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak not as a former president, but as a citizen, as a father, as someone who still believes, stubbornly perhaps, in the promise of this country. Because lately I've been watching, and like many of you, I've felt the weight of division, of fear, of the endless noise that tries to drown out our better angels. Now, I don't speak often about my successor, and I believe, truly, that the office demands a certain level of respect. But when silence threatens to look like indifference, we have a responsibility to speak up. Not out of bitterness, not out of ego, but out of love for our country. You see, leadership isn't about theatrics. It's not about dominating headlines or stirring anger for applause. It's about lifting people up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And when a former president, someone who once swore to defend our Constitution, instead fans the flames of division, attacks the very institutions that uphold democracy, and tells Americans to distrust the truth, well, the gloves must come off. Not to fight with fists, but to defend with facts, with dignity, with courage. Let me tell you about a woman named Grace from Ohio. She's a single mom, works 2 jobs, and volunteers on weekends registering voters. She doesn't have time for cable news feuds, but she believes deeply that her voice matters, that kindness matters, that truth matters. Or Jamal, a young man from Atlanta, who told me, Mr. President, I grew up watching you, and now I'm in law school because I want to make this system better, not tear it down. These are the Americans I believe in. Not the loudest in the room, but the ones doing the work. This country wasn't built by cynics. It was built by strivers, by dreamers, by folks who believe that progress might be slow, but it's always possible. That we may stumble, but we keep going. Because America has always been less about where we are and more about where we're going. So yes, we can call out lies without becoming liars. We can confront darkness without becoming dark ourselves. We need leaders who tell the truth, even when it's inconvenient, who unite people, not pit them against each other, and who remember that words matter because they shape our future. This is not just a political moment, it's a moral one. And the question isn't just who leads us, but who we choose to be. Do we give in to fear, or do we reach for hope? Do we let the angry few define our nation, or do we remember the quiet strength of the many? My friends, the challenges ahead are real, but so is our capacity to meet them together. We've done it before, we'll do it again. Because in the face of division, we choose unity. In the face of despair, we choose resolve. And in the face of lies, we choose truth. So I'm here to tell you, not just as a former president, but as a fellow citizen, the future is still ours to shape, and I still believe, yes, we can. Thank you. God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. In an era dominated by social media sound bites, viral clips, and endless news cycles, it's easy to mistake visibility for vision. We've reached a point where the loudest voice in the room often drowns out the wisest. But real leadership, the kind that endures, the kind that builds rather than breaks, has never been about the performance. It's been about integrity. Integrity means telling the truth even when it's inconvenient. It means standing up for what's right, not just what's popular. Leaders who possess integrity don't twist facts to fit their narratives. They don't scapegoat the vulnerable or exploit fear for applause. Instead, they ground themselves in principles that extend beyond personal gain. They understand that leadership is a responsibility, not a brand. History reminds us that the most impactful leaders were not always the flashiest. They weren't always trending, but they were trusted. Think of Abraham Lincoln, who carried a nation through civil war with a quiet but unshakable commitment to unity. Think of Nelson Mandela, who emerged from prison not with vengeance, but with a moral authority that demanded reconciliation. These were not men who shouted into microphones just to be heard. They spoke with purpose, and the world listened. In contrast, spectacle seeks attention. It thrives on division. It rewards outrage over outcomes, emotion over evidence. Spectacle can win ratings. It can fill stadiums, but it cannot fix a broken healthcare system. It cannot reform education. It cannot restore the soul of a nation. Integrity, however, requires restraint. It means sometimes telling people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. This is why the difference makes winning. It requires a restraint. It means sometimes telling people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. It's sometimes telling people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. It's sometimes telling people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. It's sometimes telling people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. It means admitting when you're wrong, learning from mistakes, and placing service above self. It's the quiet decisions behind closed doors, the moments when no one is watching, that define the strength of a leader's character. Leadership with integrity doesn't seek validation through applause. It finds fulfillment in impact. It understands that public trust, once broken, is not easily rebuilt, and that every word, every policy, every decision sends a message, not just to supporters, but to future generations watching and learning what leadership is supposed to look like. A leader driven by integrity does not weaponize power. They protect it. They do not lead with ego. They lead with empathy. In moments of profound division or injustice, silence is not neutrality, it is complicity. It is not integrity, it is complicity. Throughout history, societies have faltered not just because of the actions of a loud few, but because of the inaction of the many who knew better but said nothing. Speaking out isn't always easy. It can be uncomfortable, even dangerous. But when truth is under assault and values are being eroded in broad daylight, remaining silent becomes a moral failure. Speaking out means more than just voicing opinions. It means standing for principles. It means risking convenience for conviction. When democratic institutions are attacked, when lies are repeated so often that they begin to resemble truth, and when leaders abandon responsibility for personal power, the burden falls on everyday citizens, teachers, nurses, veterans, students, to step into the breach. It becomes their duty to say, "This is not who we are." Too often, people hesitate because they don't believe their voice matters. They wait for someone else to say what needs to be said. But change has never come solely from elected officials or public figures. It comes from kitchen tables, from church halls, from classrooms. It begins with one person choosing not to look away. Rosa Parks didn't start a movement with a speech. She started it with a seat she refused to give up. Speaking out doesn't always make headlines. Sometimes it's a quiet refusal to accept the unacceptable. There is also a fear that speaking out will cause division. But real unity cannot be built on falsehoods or silence. Unity that ignores injustice is not unity, it's submission. To truly come together, we must be honest with one another. That honesty begins when people speak up, when they hold their leaders accountable, and when they reject the convenient narratives and instead demand clarity, compassion, and truth. History remembers those who had the courage to speak when it mattered most. Whether it was Martin Luther King Jr. declaring that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, or journalists exposing corruption at great personal risk, progress has always required people who are willing to take a stand, especially when the cost is high. These individuals understood that moral clarity is more important than political safety, that their responsibility to the truth outweighed their comfort in the moment. We live in a time when misinformation spreads faster than facts, and when entire groups of people are demonized for political gain. In such times, silence becomes permission. Every time someone refuses to speak up against hatred, discrimination, or deceit, that silence becomes part of the problem. It creates a void that others will gladly fill with propaganda, fear, and division. Speaking out is not about shouting others down. It is not about rage. It's about saying what must be said with decency and purpose, even when it's unpopular. It's about drawing the line and saying, "We are better than this." It's about ensuring that history cannot say, "We stood by and watched while the truth was under attack." When we look back on the moments that defined history, the tides that turned, the walls that fell, the systems that changed, we often see famous faces attached to those moments. Presidents, civil rights leaders, generals, innovators. But behind those headlines, behind every major breakthrough, was a quiet force. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Ordinary people like the factory worker who clocked in every morning at 6 a.m., never missed a shift, and still managed to help organize her community for better wages and safer working conditions. Like the teacher in a rural town who saw potential in children's society had already written off and taught them to believe they could be more. Like the nurse who sat beside the dying in the middle of a pandemic, holding hands that families couldn't, reminding strangers that they weren't alone. These aren't people who are celebrated on magazine covers. Their stories don't trend on social media, but they are the backbone of progress, the quiet engine of hope and resilience. They are the ones who remind us that greatness isn't reserved for those with titles, but is found in acts of courage, kindness, and persistence that often go unnoticed. Consider the janitor who worked at NASA in the 1960s. When asked what his role was, he didn't say, "I clean floors." He said, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." That's the kind of quiet pride and purpose that defines the power of the ordinary individual. Someone who understands that even their smallest contribution can be part of something monumental. During the civil rights movement, it wasn't just Martin Luther King Jr. or Rosa Parks who changed the world. It was the thousands of unnamed marchers in Selma and Montgomery. It was the volunteers who registered voters in hostile towns. It was the parents who taught their children to keep their heads high in the face of hatred. These were not people seeking fame. They were simply doing what they felt was right. And in doing so, they shaped the course of a nation. In every major crisis, economic collapses, natural disasters, wars, it's ordinary people who show the greatest strength. When systems falter and leadership wavers, they are the ones who step up. They organize food drives, they check in on neighbors, they rebuild communities brick by brick. They don't wait for permission to act. They don't ask for the spotlight. They just do what needs to be done. Think about the immigrant who came to a new country with nothing but determination, who worked 2 jobs, learned a new language, and still made time to help others in their community adjust. Or the student who uses their spare time to tutor others for free. Or the mechanic who teaches young men in his neighborhood how to fix cars so they have a skill to stand on. These actions might seem small, but over time, they ripple outward. They build confidence. They create opportunity. They lift entire communities. The power of ordinary people lies in their consistency, their refusal to give up, even when things are hard, their belief that showing up day after day matters. And it does. In fact, that's where real change comes from. Not from grand speeches or viral videos, but from people who keep pushing forward even when no one is watching. There's a reason politicians and CEOs speak so often about everyday heroes, because they know, deep down, that the success of any society doesn't rest solely on the shoulders of a few individuals at the top. It rests on the millions who carry its weight each day without fanfare. They teach the children, they stock the shelves, they fix the pipes, drive the buses, care for the sick, deliver the mail, and keep the peace. They make democracy function. They are the guardians of decency in everyday life. And the beauty of their power is that it's available to everyone. You don't need 1 million followers or a fancy degree. You don't need to hold office or have a platform. You just need to care. You need to act. You need to believe that your choices matter, because they do. Every time you stand up for someone, every time you help without being asked, every time you speak truth in the face of lies, you are shaping the culture around you. Ordinary people create movements when they band together. They start with small conversations at dinner tables, in churches, in break rooms. They form coalitions. They knock on doors. They write letters. They show up. And through this steady, persistent presence, they become unstoppable forces. It's not about perfection. It's about participation. It's about the belief that even the smallest action, when done with purpose, can ignite something far greater. Fear is a powerful force. It's ancient, wired into our DNA, designed to keep us alive. But while fear might protect us in moments of danger, it becomes dangerous itself when it's allowed to drive our decisions, shape our beliefs, or define how we see one another. Fear builds walls around our hearts, between our communities, across our borders. It convinces us that the world is getting worse, that people are out to get us. It convinces us that the world is getting worse, that people are out to get us, that there's not enough to go around. And once fear takes root, it becomes difficult to see clearly, to dream boldly, to move forward at all. That's why hope isn't just a nice idea, it's a radical act. It's the refusal to accept fear as the final word. Hope says, yes, things are hard, but not impossible. Yes, we've been hurt, but unity is still possible. Yes, we've been divided, but unity can be rebuilt. Hope doesn't ignore reality. It insists that reality can change. And that change begins not with someone else, but with us. In times of crisis, fear often rises first. It's loud, it spreads quickly. Politicians and media outlets know this, and too many are willing to exploit it, to stoke anxiety, demonize others, and divide people for short-term gain. Fear becomes a tool, a weapon, even a currency. But while fear might win the day, it never builds a better tomorrow. Hope, by contrast, is quiet. It shows up in small, quieter places. A parent comforting a child after a long day. A neighbor delivering food to someone in need. A young person standing up against injustice. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't shout. It simply keeps showing up, over and over, even when no one's watching. Throughout history, the most transformative movements for freedom, for equality, for peace, were led by people who chose hope over fear. They were told it couldn't be done. They were told to be afraid, but they kept going, not because they were naive, but because they knew that fear may paralyze, but hope energizes. Fear divides, but hope builds bridges. Fear looks for enemies, but hope looks for common ground. Hope pushes us to imagine something better and then to work for it. It gives us the strength to believe that progress is not only possible, but worth fighting for. When the words, "Yes, we can," were first spoken on that cold night in 2008, they were more than a campaign slogan. They were a declaration, a call to action that reached beyond politics and touched something deeper in the American spirit. It was a phrase rooted in struggle, in resilience, in the belief that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they stood together with purpose and conviction. That message didn't belong to one man or one moment. It belonged to generations, to the women who marched for the right to vote, to the civil rights activists who faced down dogs and water hoses, to the workers who demanded dignity in factories and fields, to the immigrants who arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. Yet, "We can" was never about perfection. It was always about possibility. Even now, in a time of division, misinformation, and growing cynicism, the spirit behind those three words still echoes. It echoes in classrooms where teachers stay late, unpaid, so no child gets left behind. It echoes in the halls of hospitals where nurses work through exhaustion, holding hands and offering hope. It echoes in community organizers knocking on doors, in volunteers feeding the hungry, in young people rising up to protect the planet they'll inherit. Some will tell you that things are too broken, too far gone, that change is a fantasy, that the system is rigged and hope is naive. But they forget that the progress we've made, the barriers we've broken, the rights we've won, the voices we've lifted, all began with someone who refused to accept that answer. Someone who looked at the world not as it is, but as it could be, and chose to believe they had a role in shaping it. "Yes, we can" is not a promise that things will be easy. It's not a guarantee of victory. It's a reminder that even in the face of impossible odds, there is power in trying. There is strength in unity. There is dignity in action. It's a choice to engage instead of withdraw, to rise instead of retreat, to believe that we are not passive observers of history, but authors of it.